So I'd like to welcome you along to tonight's FASD Hub webinar. My name is Barbara Ogston and I'm FASD Project Lead. And I'm joined tonight by Natalie, who has beaming in from the other side of the world to join us tonight to talk all about her experiences of homeschooling and let you know about some other things that she does as well, so writing books and podcasts, and she's a very busy person. So the format of tonight will be that Natalie is going to do a presentation for about half of the session talking about homeschooling and home education, as we would call it here. And there'll then be we've got pre-submitted questions that people submitted when you registered, and we'll put some of those to Natalie. However, if you do have any other questions at any time, please just do put them into the Q&A function and we'll answer those if we possibly can. I think that's all that I needed to tell you. So please enjoy this evening. I hope that it's really beneficial and you learn lots. And I'm going to pass over to Natalie to keep us going.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Katie. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. My name is Natalie Vecchione, and I wear many hats, one of which is a homeschool mom. I have two, one young adult and one child, and we graduated our son from homeschooling or home education in 2020, and he is currently working part-time, and we talk about our journey in our book, which I will refer. But today's topic, or I should say tonight's topic, is home education, as it's called there in Scotland and in the UK, home education and FASD. So like Barbara said, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the Q&A section, and then I will address any questions. Hopefully I'll address any questions or point to you to the resources that you're looking for after today's presentation. So let's begin. So a little bit more about me. I'm a homeschool mom of 8.5 years, going on my 9th year of homeschooling. We started homeschooling, I like to say, as the ultimate accommodation for our son. Our son has a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. We were verbally told when he was 2, but we did not get an official diagnosis until he was 15. So we spent 13 years trying to get his diagnosis. And once he received that diagnosis, all of the pieces of the puzzle just started fitting together. I really do like to say that homeschooling or home education is the ultimate accommodation, not just for FASD, but any type of brain-based condition, or even if your child is just not thriving in a traditional school environment. We also have a daughter, as I mentioned before. She does not have an FASD, but she does have, she is dyslexic and she does have absence epilepsy. And we homeschool her for different reasons, but again, they're wonderful accommodations that we do, and as well as focusing on her strengths while supporting her needs. So I wasn't always a podcaster, author, advocate. I was actually, my background, I was trained, I went to university for music therapy and recreation therapy. And when we adopted our son in 2002, 20 years ago, I started working part-time. And then when we started homeschooling him, I stopped working altogether. And I really didn't become an FASD parent advocate, I would say, until about 2018, 2019 was when I started realizing that what I learned about FASD and our journey in FASD needed to be shared so that we could hopefully help more people. So my husband and I co-founded FASD Hope 2 years ago, October 1st, 2020. I'm a podcaster of both FASD Hope. You can find FASD Hope anywhere you find your podcast. And my newest podcast and newest venture is called Homeschool Mom Collaborative, where I'm a co-host with 2 other lovely homeschool moms, and we interview and highlight homeschool moms and homeschool families from all over the world who have businesses or ministries or advocacies or not-for-profits. We talk to them about that balancing act of homeschooling and doing what they're doing. I'm also, like Barbara said, I'm the co-author of Blazing New Homeschool Trails, Educating and Launching Teens with Developmental Disabilities. You can purchase it on Amazon. I also believe that there may be some copies that Barbara and Katie may have that you can talk to. A lot of the material we're talking about today, we touch upon in the book, but definitely today's discussion is not limited to just what we talk about in the book. I've also been trained in actually an international, I believe it was founded in Australia, an international mental health program called Mental Health First Aid. And I, as a mom on this journey, again, I'm speaking to you tonight as a mom and as a parent advocate. What I'm saying is not professional, clinical, educational, so I just want to give that little disclaimer. But Mental Health First Aid is a wonderful program. It's pretty much just like basic first aid or CPR, but for mental health. It is an 8-hour course that you take, and there are actually 2 programs. You can take it for children for identifying, emergency mental health emergencies in children, and you could take it for adults. I took it for adults because at the time our son was 16 and I felt like we needed the adult. I may go back and take the children just because it's a wonderful certification and training to have. And if you want to learn more about that, you can ask in the Q&A section and I can point you in that direction. I was honored in 2019, before the pandemic. I was honored to be chosen one of 50 parent leaders to participate in the Family Leadership Summit of the Exceptional Children's Assistance Center of North Carolina. It was a wonderful weekend. And that weekend really kind of sparked I need to take FASD advocacy beyond our neighborhood, beyond, our home, advocating for our son and helping others. So that was really, I think that was probably the defining moment in me becoming a parent advocate. So, and as I shared before, I'm a mom to a son, a wonderful son who is now 20. I can't believe it. He has a 2. I got used to his numbers starting with a 1, but now he's 20. He graduated from homeschool. He officially graduated in 2020. And he is now a part-time, he works part-time in a hardware store. He is also helping his first carpentry teacher convert one of our workshops, detached workshops, into his tiny home. So that's, if you have questions about that, I'm happy to answer that. So we're nicknaming it the launch pad. And that's where our son will be living until he decides, where he wants to go. So we talk a little bit about that in our book. So that's our son. And our daughter has childhood absence epilepsy, which are basically absence seizures, often mistaken for other diagnoses. And then she also is dyslexic, which we consider a superpower in her because she really thinks out of the box. So she started her homeschool journey in 2020. So to summarize that, I have a 20-year-old son and I have a 7-year-old daughter. So that's why the hair is this gray. So I'm going to continue now and we'll start our presentation. So I should have, and I apologize, I say homeschooling because that's how we refer to home education here in the States. So anytime you hear homeschooling, just reinsert home education because I know that's what you call homeschooling in Scotland and in the UK. So, but I'll try to substitute the words for you. Home education, homeschooling, is the education of children at home or at a variety of places other than school, usually conducted by a parent, a tutor, or an online teacher. And this is given by Wikipedia. I just took a general, I took a general definition for it. But what I would like you to extrapolate from this definition are 3 things. First of all, home education generally happens at home, but it can happen many other places. So for example, today, I just re-enrolled our daughter in in-person art lessons at our local art center. That's education, and that's part of her homeschooling plan that we have. It can happen in co-ops, cooperatives, it can happen in groups, it can happen at community centers that offer homeschool classes. So it doesn't always have to happen at home. So that's takeaway point number one. Takeaway point number two, it is education that is really you as the parent or caregiver, or the foster care, excuse me, you are responsible for their education, but it's not completely on your shoulders. There are other people who can educate your child. Classic example for our son. I'm not a carpenter. Now, my son has made these wonderful, he made the desk that, we work from at home. He's made amazing projects. I know nothing about carpentry. So in our book, and I'll tell you a little bit in this presentation, we outsourced that part of education we found two wonderful carpentry teachers, both of whom we're still in touch, and they're just such a wonderful part of our son's life. And our son did an old-fashioned apprenticeship like they did hundreds of years ago, where somebody would shadow somebody for years. And that's how our son learned his trade. So it's not, even though you are responsible for their education, please don't think that you're the only teacher. You're not. Another popular program we use here in the States, and I believe it's growing popularity outside of the States too, is OutSchool. So online programs. I like OutSchool because for some classes it's a repeating or reoccurring class. So for example, our daughter's, she takes tutoring for her dyslexia from a tutor on OutSchool, who is fantastic. I sing her praises up and down. And in fact, if anybody is interested, I can give Katie and Barbara her information. But that's a recurring class that she does. And again, I'm not trained in dyslexia. I'm learning about it. I'm learning a lot about it in the curriculum, but her tutor is. So, and then in OutSchool, another example, she takes one-time classes. So she tries this ballet class or this dance class. So OutSchool and programs like that are wonderful. Again, in outsourcing that information for subjects or for areas that you may not have that either expertise, or you just want your child to have a little bit more from someone who specializes in that. And then the third and final thing is it's conducted by a parent, tutor, or online teacher. And I have to say that, especially since the pandemic 2 years ago, online resources, even in-person resources in homeschooling has boomed. When we started home educating, homeschooling almost 9 years ago with our son, there was very little to nothing out there. I think one of the big resources we used was Khan Academy, which I know is still very popular. And there were other resources, but not like today. So I have to say, if you are considering home education for your child or your teen, there are so many resources available to you today, especially for children and teens who learn differently like ours. So some fast facts about homeschooling. Excuse me. Number one, as I stated before, prior to COVID-19, approximately 2.5 million homeschool students in the United States. So that was about 3 to 4% of school-age children. Prior to COVID-19, the annual growth rate of homeschool families here in the US was about 2 to 8%, give or take. Second point, homeschooling, home education is becoming more mainstream and growing in other countries besides the US. And I've done this presentation for states in the US as well as out of the country. So Australia, Canada, France, Hungary, Japan, Scotland, and the UK. The growth and the popularity in homeschooling and home education is much more mainstream than it was when we first started. Number three, this is a really interesting fact, and it highlights how we can focus on the strengths of our children. Most peer-reviewed studies on homeschooling outcomes find that homeschoolers generally outperform their school peers academically and have positive life experiences. So a little backstory with our home education journey with our son. he was not failing any topics, or I should say any subjects. When we decided to homeschool him, he wasn't failing. He was actually, in some subjects, he was doing quite well. But the plan for his education, he was still in elementary, just about to move, or primary, he was just about to move into the middle grades. We were not happy with the IEP, with the individualized plan that the school had for him. They wanted to move him to a different program, away from his friends. And my husband and I felt that was just, we did not agree with that. So it was literally, the meeting happened on a Friday and we started homeschooling him on a Monday. Now, if I could go back in retrospect, I would say definitely give your child time to decompress or deschool. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But I would say if you ask our son, especially on a good day, if you asked him, and actually I hear him I overhear, I hear him say this to our daughter, that, you know, he'll tell her, Gigi, mom was the best teacher I ever had, and homeschooling was the coolest thing I was able to do. And that right there, just, it makes my heart smile, because we were able to support his needs, but really focus on his strengths. And I genuinely believe that if he were in traditional school, we would have never known he was a gifted carpenter, he was gifted in computers, because they would have spent so much time trying to remediate the subjects that he was not going to progress as quickly. So, and last but not least, and this is really interesting, urban families are among the fastest growing group of homeschoolers or home educators, as parents seek alternatives to an increasing standardized, one-size-fits-all mass schooling model. And I like to tell people when they're on, you know, when they're not sure about home educating their children, I like to tell them, well, you know, unfortunately, most traditional schools have this like mass kind of, you know, education in mind. Okay, so this grade you do this and that. And if, like our children, you know, and I say that affectionately, like our children, if they fall anywhere out of that bell curve, then schools, honestly, unless it's a small private school that is specifically tailored to, you know, your child, they're not going to be able to pick up on those outliers on the outside of the curve. And I also like to give the example that in outside of education, there are really no examples of a bunch of let's say 30 25-year-olds getting together, unless it's, you know, university, or unless it's something specifically related to education. You know, if you went to, say you signed up for an art class in your local community art center, so like we did, for example, today for our daughter, they did an age range. So her class is 7 to 10-year-olds. You know, most of the times when we do things, it's either, you know, a hybrid mix of age groups, or maybe it's an age range, but it's not like one specific age range and one specific thing. So I like to say that in home education, we educate by developmental stage, not by chronological age. All right. So now let's talk about some of the reasons families choose to home educate their children. So first of all, and this was a big factor in our decision, to make a change from a negative school environment, for example, bullying, our son was bullied, school violence, etc. I hear more and more from parents, especially here in the States, that that scenario has happened with their children. They were either bullied, or you know, they were just subjected to school violence, and it was a very traumatizing experience for them. And if we think about the backgrounds of our children have experienced a lot of trauma in their lives, prenatally, being exposed to alcohol prenatally or other substances, and then the trauma of going through either foster care or adoption. There is trauma in there. So having school be a trauma, I think it really makes, for us, it made sense to say, you know what, one of the many reasons we're going to bring him home is so that we can help foster that relationship connection and help him develop friends. And he has made wonderful friends through homeschooling because, again, he made friends with common interests. He loves carpentry, he loves being outdoors, he loves computers. The friends that he has made that when he began homeschooling, they had similar interests. Another reason we choose to homeschool our children, and many choose to home educate their children, are to support children or teens who learn differently. And we know, and I'm going to hold this, and this is just such a wonderful resource. I didn't share it, but I can give Katie and Barbara the link for it. Trying Differently Rather Than Harder by Diane Maudlin. And the Facets neurobehavioral model is based on that book. I highly recommend it if you haven't read it already. Our children learn differently, and they shouldn't have to try harder in school. Educating our children who have been prenatally exposed to alcohol, it's our job as parents and carers to make their connections where they're at, rather than trying to bring them up to a standard that is very taxing for them and for their brain. Another reason is to allow more time for things like multisensory learning, which we all know ways that our children input information. An example of multisensory learning that we did for our son was we would recite math facts while he was on the scooter. He would be riding the scooter, or when he was skateboarding, or we would do maybe spelling words on the trampoline. The more input our children's brains or teens' brains get in learning their information, the better that information has in being retained in their brain. And we know that children that have prenatal alcohol exposure, individuals, not just children, that working memory is difficult. It's not reliable. So giving them more input opportunities really helps. And that's not just in FASD. We incorporate that learning with our daughter as well. Actively learning with real life experiences, community involvement learning, mentorships, apprenticeships, and we discussed that in our book, Blazing New Homeschool Trails. My co-author, Cindy LaJoy, they did an entrepreneur. They started their own business. We did an old-fashioned carpentry apprenticeship. And then finally, one thing that I think really is important, bonding and developing relationships. And I have a friend, she's been a guest on FASD Hope, and she's actually going to be a guest in October. And she has homeschooled her sons, I want to say for 10 years, maybe a little less than that. And I told her that this needs to be on a t-shirt. This motto needs to be on a t-shirt. Mental health over math. Character over curriculum. Relationship over reading. Now, obviously, math, curriculum, and reading are important. I'm not discounting that. But we know for our children who learn differently and who have experienced both prenatal trauma and lived trauma, relationship, character, building character, and mental health, really, those are so paramount in the well-being of our children and teens and young adults. A few more reasons to pursue specific academic interests that may not be addressed in school. So in our son's case, he was very interested in both computer coding and carpentry. Those were not available in our local schools. So we were able to pursue that. And again, I'm so thankful we did, because he really enjoys and he is growing in those areas. To allow for a more flexible schedule. So if anyone has heard, there is, and I can share the link for this, there's a study, and it's actually kind of a given that there are believed to be over 428 medical diagnoses that are associated with having a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. We know firsthand our son probably has at least 20 medical diagnoses from his FASD. One of the reasons we started homeschooling, and I share this in the book, is because he was missing a lot of school because of some gastrointestinal issues that we later found out were related to his FASD. So homeschooling, if your child has medical issues or mental health issues, you can incorporate days off for learning. You know, here in North Carolina, one of our 3 regulations is we need to home educate our children 180 days each year. Now, there's nothing that says which days they need to be educated. So, for example, with our daughter, if she has an obstinate seizure, and that will pretty much wipe her out for the rest of the day, and sometimes the day after, then we can say, okay, we're gonna school on this day, or maybe even do a little bit of Saturday school. So there's flexibility in homeschooling. And then finally, for families who travel or have student athletes, performers, artists, or that have non-traditional schedules. And I have talked to parents who, you know, maybe the mother works a night shift at the hospital, dad works day shift or whatever. Homeschooling allows for that flexibility. Okay, so here in the United States, we have regulations, and I know that there in Scotland and in the UK, every council, every local council, I believe, oversees the regulations. So one of the things I share is I definitely recommend if you're not homeschooling, or if you are homeschooling, to please follow the regulations by your council or by your local government. So here in the US, 5 states have very strict regulations. We actually started in one of those states. New York is one of the most heavily regulated states for homeschooling. We started there, and then we moved to a moderate state. We moved to North Carolina, which is in the orange, and the majority of states in the US are moderately regulated or low regulated. Now, that doesn't mean that governments don't care, you do whatever you want. No, it just means that the regulations, so for example, here in North Carolina, you need to register your homeschool with the Department of Non-Public Education, register and name your homeschool, and each year update it. So, you know, how many children are you home educating? So for example, we started with our son, he has graduated, so now it's just our daughter. And then the second and third regulations are 180 days of actual schooling. And then the third one is a standardized test. And I know that was somebody had a question about standardized testing. I will address that at the end of our presentation. And then finally, 11 states have minimal to no regulations. However, I would safely say that since COVID, there's probably more states that have moved to the low or moderate regulations because of the growing popularity of homeschooling. So, what is the difference between homeschooling or home education and then virtual school at home? There's actually quite a few differences, because especially in the beginning of the pandemic, people would ask me, oh, well, we virtual school at home, so it's the same as homeschooling. It's not. So, home education, you're on your own schedule. You and your children have time to decompress, and I would highly recommend that. One of the things, and I was telling Barbara and Katie before we started recording, if I could go back and do it again, I would have built in time to de-school our son. And I don't mean de-school. De-school is not like, you know, oh, forget everything you learned or anything. No, it's having more what I call mental health days. So having more days where we go to the park or we go to the beach or that kind of thing. I've learned from my son's experience to incorporate that into my daughter's experience. Even though she's never been in a traditional school setting, I build in what we like to call girls' day, which is her and I just going and doing something active and fun. So like, for example, today we went to our local art center, who loves our owner and teacher, loves our daughter, and she just gave us an hour to just kind of walk around the gallery and the classroom and everything. And that was like decompression for both of us. So you have time to plan and organize, which I highly recommend, especially if you need to keep up with regulations, to build a routine, structure, and a schedule. Now, about schedule, I have had a lot of parents say, oh, you mean so I have to schedule, from 9 to 10 a.m. and 10 to, no, I don't mean, some people are like that, and that's wonderful. But I've found for our children who learn, and teens who learn differently, I like to schedule it like morning, lunchtime, early afternoon, and late afternoon. I like to schedule our days in chunks of time. So if you saw our homeschool schedule, which is actually in our kitchen and it's up there, I kind of have it broken up in morning, lunchtime, early afternoon, and then late afternoon. That builds in flexibility. So if I say, okay, we're going to do math and art in the morning today, we accomplished our goals, rather than saying we're going to be done by noon. No, today it was done by about 1:30, and that's okay. So for me, now again, other people whose children thrive on structure, like hour by hour, if that is what is best for your child, then go for it. I've just found for my children slash young adult, doing things in a chunk of time to give yourselves a buffer works best for our family. And then finally, learn strategies that work. So I know another question that was asked was, what curriculum do you use? And my answer is, it depends on the subject. I think our children are, my children anyways, are not this curriculum for all subjects and that's it. If your child is like that, that's fantastic. But I like to consider myself an eclectic homeschooler. So my daughter's reading and math curriculum is much different than her science and history curriculum. So, and it was the same with our son too. In school at home, you're on your school schedule. You have to attempt to school at home and follow the times, assignments, and the structure that has been given to you by their school or by their district. Another comparison is you determine the curriculum. So that big C, curriculum, work strategies and routines based on their learning style, your teaching style, and then topics that are relevant and developmentally appropriate for your children. So for example, our daughter is very gifted in art. She's in the 7 to 10-year-old class, and she just turned 7. She's doing things that, but she's been doing art for almost 4 years. That's one of her strengths, one of her, I like to call her treasures. So it's going to look different. Again, her art curriculum looks much different than the curriculum, she would use maybe in a traditional school setting. So it really depends on both your child's learning style and your teaching style. I can recommend certain curriculums, but again, I think it's personal. And for us, especially with our son who has an FASD, one year we may have tried one curriculum and the next year we do another one, or even in the middle of the year we would change. That's okay. And versus schooling at home, education at home, your school determines the curriculum. They formulate how and what information will be taught. They may or may not be able to accommodate how well this information and the methods that they use will work for your children. Another comparison, homeschool deadlines are based on your judgment. So your children's work can be completed at their own pace and retaught when necessary. And I know here in the States, most of the first part of, going back to school is that review of what they learned the year before. That's the same thing in homeschool. We school year round because in North Carolina, it is stinking hot in the summertime, and I'd rather be in an air-conditioned home, our home, schooling, and then if our daughter wants to go to the beach on a day where it's more mild climate or more comfortable climate, then that's what we're going to do. So our deadlines are, we school year round. But when we tell people that, people think, oh, you must not take a break. No, actually, we take quite a few breaks. We take a whole month off in June. We take a good part of December off. We take some other, times, a week here, a week there throughout the year. So again, it depends on your state or your provincial guidelines. So I would make sure you check with them as far as deadlines. But we learn at our daughter's pace. We teach at our daughter's pace. Same thing with our son. And then finally, education at home, deadlines are dictated by your school or the district. They must be communicated by an administrator or a teacher. And I think this is the final comparison. You schedule outings and gatherings. So in homeschooling or home educating, there's plenty of opportunities, especially, we're 2 years, 3 years, into the pandemic. So many places, centers, programs have developed. So there's plenty of opportunities for things like field trips, outings, meetups, outdoor activities, co-op gatherings, mentorships, and extra learning activities. For outings and field trips with the school, it's determined by the school. So they may not have as many opportunities as you would if you homeschooled. Okay. I wanted to make sure those were all the comparisons. So some advice from moms of kids or teens that have an FASD who also home educate. So you can see here, Cindy's comment is your child has strengths and needs. Don't force that academic grade across the board. So this is a classic example. If somebody comes up to our daughter and says, what grade are you in? She'll say, it depends on the subject, because that's what I taught her. Because in some subjects, she's actually well above her grade level. And then in other subjects, she might be right at or below her grade level. It really depends. And that's the beauty of home education. They don't have to be clear across the board for each subject. Paige also shares that when she did virtual school at home or traditional school, it was always about deadline and assignments and meeting those deadlines. In homeschooling and home education, she can meet those assignments according to their needs and adjust them. And she always knows that she can meet them where they're learning. So another word of advice, another piece of advice from Mia is incorporate visuals, hands-on activities, exploring the outdoors, read alouds, which is huge, very popular in our house, real life activities. We want to, and I love, one of the many reasons I love homeschooling is because both of my kids, they both enjoy learning and it's not forced upon them. And I just love that. I think that is just such a strength, that they enjoy learning. So that's really something that you can drive home, that learning is fun. And then finally, Ashley said, homeschooling is such an accommodation. Like I said, I call it the ultimate accommodation. When your child has an FASD or medical issues, you may have a lot of appointments. And I know we did. Routine is important, but don't get stuck into a schedule. So that's why, like for our example, we kind of schedule in chunks versus hours. Allow for flexibility, especially when your child is having a difficult day or difficult days or weeks. All right. So I know from speaking with Barbara and Katie that some of you already homeschool, some of you are considering it, some of you are just inquiring about it. So if you're ready to take the leap into homeschooling, first and foremost, and again, I'm not a professional, I'm not a clinician, I'm not an educator, I'm a mom with lived experience. So anything that you're hearing today, please know that I'm sharing resources, and that's all I'm doing. And I kind of also give that disclaimer on our podcast, FASD Hope, as well as in our book. So always check with the laws or the regulations with your local council or government or whoever oversees your homeschool journey. Homeschooling is legal in Scotland and in the UK, and that is wonderful. So you can find these laws. I've shared these websites, and I know that, again, I will be sending these slides to Katie and Barbara, and you can access this information on, through them. But these are 3 wonderful resources that will tell you the homeschool regulations in your area. Okay, again, before you begin, know your regulations and follow them, please. And this second point, the second and third point I would have done, if I could do it again, I would have done these next 2 points much more. Identify supports in your family, your friends, your community, online, groups, therapists, specialists, co-ops, especially for your child or teen who learns differently. If I could go back, I would have outsourced much more than I did. And the beauty of home educating now versus 9 years ago is that there are a lot more resources and supports out there for you. So that was the first thing I would do. Secondly, please, and Cindy also shares this in our book too, schedule self-care for yourself. You're going to need it. So, and I say self-care, people think, oh, I don't have time to go eat chocolate and watch my favorite television show. No, that's not self-care. Self-care is doing something to recharge your battery. So for me, I'm actually, believe it or not, I'm quite introverted. You wouldn't know it. I have a podcast and I do all this advocacy work, but I'm actually quite introverted. So for me, my self-care is either walking or running on my treadmill, which I love to do, or just decompressing by just retreating to my bedroom and reading a book after, my son and daughter go to sleep. That's my self-care, and incorporate it into your schedule, especially if you need supports, and find out how, whether it be hiring someone to watch your child for an hour or 2 so that you can do something for yourself, or, hey, there's a drop-off program here that I'm comfortable with my child going to. That means that I can take that time and go to the local coffee shop and read a book for an hour or something. This is really important. Next, research your learning strategies, learning supports and curriculum, workbooks, etc. I want to emphasize this. There's no one size fits all strategy. You can change curriculum lessons when you need to do so. Again, that's the meeting your child or meeting your teen where they're at. And then finally, determine a routine or schedule and allow for accommodations and flexibility. So for example, our schedule, we do it by day. So Monday, our daughter, what is our daughter? Oh, she has tutoring. She has her tutoring with her dyslexia tutor. That's Mondays. And I schedule that, and then I do usually extracurriculars afterwards because she works hard in those sessions. So I kind of schedule according to, okay, I know she's going to really work hard in this. So the afternoon will be maybe art or PE or dance or something like that. Tuesdays is PE, and then her other classes. Wednesdays will be art and math. She does those as well as some others. Thursday, she has online voice lessons as well as her other subjects. And then Friday, we kind of either do something, or we might do something fun or a unit study. So again, do what's best for your child and your family. So I like to say that I am the resource lady. Being a podcaster for almost 2 years, and just being in the position that I'm in, I share resources. That's what I feel. That's where I feel like that's my jam, as we like to say here. So here's some resources that I've looked in the UK and in Scotland. One of the resources I highly recommend is the third one, Blue Collar Homeschool. So, and I'm a little biased because Blue Collar Homeschool was founded by my co-author, Cindy LaJoy, and she shares her journey. I believe they're close to about 18 or 19,000. They're on Facebook, as well as they have a website. And her son, who I had the privilege and the honor of editing and helping him self-publish his book, It's Okay to Be You, Living Well with FASD or Other Disabilities by Kenny LaJoy. It was released yesterday. He is now a self-published author, and he shares his journey about, he is 23, what it was like to be homeschooled and have an FASD. And he really, one of his gifts is writing. And he even shares, ironically, he didn't learn how to read or write English until, I want to say, he was probably like 9 or 10, because he was adopted from Eastern Europe. And not only did his having an FASD and the trauma of his before he was adopted come to play, but then everything, he really eloquently shares his story. So I'm a little biased that Blue Collar Homeschool is probably my favorite in these resources. Many of our kids, teens, may not be destined for a university or the military or some sort of post-academia formal type of education. So Blue Collar Homeschool really focuses on what we love in our family: the entrepreneurs, the skilled trades, the carpenters, farmers, anyone. Those are important. And we've actually learned in the pandemic that those blue collar jobs really keep us going as a society. So it's important to make sure that we're invested in those. So I've also listed some other resources. And again, if you need to see these, I will send the slides to Barbara and to Katie. Even more resources, again, because I like to say I'm the resource lady. Facebook groups, if you're on Facebook, Homeschooling the FASD Way, a global community. I love that group. Ashley Enns is the founder. She's wonderful, and she lets people share just experiences, and it's a well-moderated group. Of course, again, Blue Collar Homeschool. There's another Facebook group, Special Needs Homeschooling. And then finally, Special Needs Homeschooling High School and Beyond. And I'm sure there are UK specific homeschooling and special needs home education groups. So these are not limited to just this list. And then finally, some websites: learndifferently.com, spedhomeschool.com, and then homeschool.com. There are quite a few articles about homeschooling with special needs or homeschooling differently. So I think that's it. I really appreciate your listening to me and the time for me to just share our journey and to share a little bit about ourselves. That's a very old picture of my son and my daughter, but I love that picture because it really shows the bond that we have in our family. If you'd like to reach out to me, please, you can email me, natalie@fasdhope.com. You can also contact me through our website. And I just appreciate you all listening to me. And I'm going to turn it back over to Barbara.
Thank you very much, Natalie. That was really interesting, and as somebody that knows absolutely nothing about home education and finds the whole idea quite scary, I thought there was a lot of really interesting information in there, particularly around like scheduling. I would have thought you'd have to do 9 to 10 maths, but no, it's obviously it's been quite eye-opening, just the flexibility that there is around it. And I'm sure everybody this evening has picked up some new tips and really useful resources that you shared there as well. We've got time for some questions. And so our first question is, it's recognised that youngsters who get involved in the criminal justice system are found to have fallen out of the education system. With proper resourcing and having the time and energy to do so, can home education provide something for these youngsters with FASD?
Yes, I have to say yes. In fact, I've interviewed and will be releasing an episode with a doctorate of education here in the States. And her children do not have FASD, but they do have brain-based diagnoses. And there is a very strong correlation between teens, children and teens who have fallen through those cracks of getting supports and have fallen, unfortunately, into juvenile, the justice system. I have to say, I don't know specific examples. Like I can't cite like articles right now. If you gave me some time, I could try to find them. But in my own personal experience, I think that our son would have had a much different outcome if we had not homeschooled him. And that was one of the reasons why, because the program that they had recommended he go into almost 9 years ago was a program that was kind of like a last chance program for, teens before they went to juvenile justice. And again, he wasn't failing anything. He was never even suspended for anything. But they were just not able to understand how his brain could remember something one day and not the other day. So my thought is, you don't discipline a disability. You don't. You need to be supportive rather than punitive. So I think now, if there's a child or a teen who's already in juvenile justice, then of course you would have to go by what they say. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to suddenly homeschool. If they're already involved in the system, then unfortunately you have to go by what their dictation is. However, if you're concerned that you think your child or teen might be heading in that direction, I can say that I have spoken with quite a few families that had that concern, started homeschooling, and felt like the relationships were coming back and the mental health issues were not being eliminated, but definitely better supported. So I would say, to answer that question, I would say from personal experience, yes, I think it is possible.
Thanks so much. And a similar question about taking a different kind of path. Somebody's asked the question that when mainstream school doesn't suit, what are your thoughts on a special school or whatever the equivalent is in your area before homeschooling?
That's a good try. We actually did that. We tried a smaller private school that was more suited for learning, learning differences and learning disabilities. Unfortunately, when we moved to New York and tried that option again, it was actually it was more cost effective for me to just stop working. Because a lot of times, unfortunately, many of those schools, especially if they're private, cost a lot of money. Whereas homeschooling, you pay for supplies and curriculums and everything. Now, if you're a 2-income family and you're going to a 1-income family, that's a big shift. So that, of course, is something you have to prepare yourself for. But again, that's our second podcast is based on that, okay, I'm not working traditionally, but how can I do a business from home, or how can I do something? So I would say that if those schools, I don't know, here in the States, there are not programs specifically for FASD. However, California, we just found out yesterday, California was the first state to acknowledge FASD as a diagnosable developmental disability, and it will be included on their IEPs and everything. That is huge here in the States. I do know, and I have to say, my friend and fellow podcaster, Jessica Rutherford from Spotlight on the UK, she is with, I believe it's Nudge Education in the UK, and they are developing an FASD specific program for schools. I can give you her information if anybody's interested. So if you're on the fence and if you're not quite ready for home education, but you know that traditional school is not working, there are options out there, and again, it's your comfort level and your children's comfort level. For us, we just dove right in, but that might not suit everybody. So yes, I think there are options out there, and there are more options. Again, it really depends on your family.
And we've got a message to say, inspiring and motivating. Thank you so very much. We've home educated for 3 years and come across so many challenges, mainly exhaustion. What have been your greatest challenges and how have you overcome them?
Exhaustion. Whoever said that, that's they're literally, and I share this, there were literally days where I was on the floor crying, saying, I can't do this anymore. And that's when I realized, okay, I need a break too, and I need to step back and I need to think of this differently. So I have to say the number one challenge for me as a mom was taking care of myself and exhaustion. In terms of us homeschooling as a homeschooling family, and I still do this, not comparing my children and my children's homeschool journey with others. I still do that. And it's very hard because we do that so much in traditional educational settings, oh, are they meeting this milestone? So I have to say that is really just think of your own journey, think of your own, trip on this home education path, and don't compare to others. Use others for support, and maybe, hey, that's a wonderful example. I think I'll try it. Like, for example, our son being a carpentry apprentice, shadowing, carpenters for over 2.5 years. That may not be somebody else's cup of tea, but maybe your child likes art and maybe wants to go, apprentice with an artist or something. So for me personally, self-care and exhaustion, as a family, just not comparing ourselves to others.
Thanks. We're just towards the end, but I've got a couple more questions I'd like to ask,
Sure.
if that's right. One, you
I'm fine.
mentioned briefly about standardized tests and approaching that. What advice can you give?
So I would say, first of all, check with your local council or your local district, whoever oversees the home education in your area. So for us here in the States, in North Carolina, that's one of our regulations. And thankfully, we are able to choose which standardized test we want to administer. So the test that I've chosen, actually, I became certified to administer one of them to my daughter because she's dyslexic. She's not reading at grade level. One of the tests that I chose allows me to read to her and her to verbally tell me back the answers. So I would say find tests that have those types of accommodations that are approved by your local state or council. If you don't know of any, then again, reach out to those special educators or those people in your area that can say, oh, here's a test that's not timed that you can do, or here's a test that allows you to make this accommodation. So yes, I would say find a test that allows the accommodations necessary. So for example, our son could read fine at grade level, but he needed time for processing, like for that auditory and for the visual processing. So I would say, yes, just find the test that you can accommodate with and make sure it's okay with your local council.
And finally, I've read your book and I thought it was really interesting, particularly how you used other people in your community to support the education of your children, particularly through the carpentry and woodwork. I thought it was absolutely beautiful. And that kind of leads into a question that 2 or 3 people have asked, and that's just about getting other people involved in the education of your children, like tutors. What's been your experiences? Is that something that you would recommend?
So again, I had to come out of my introvert shell and I cold called about 50 carpenters, and here in rural South or North Carolina, rather, here in the South, in rural North Carolina, I would say probably like 10 of them got back to me. I just, carpenters are busy, especially, and this was before the pandemic. So find your interests, your child's interests, so if they're really interested in computers, find if there's a local computer, repair store or service center or something that would be willing to let your child either shadow. So if they're younger, and Cindy and I share this in our book, if they're younger, then it would be like shadowing, kind of like they would go and shadow with supervision, that kind of thing. If they're in the middle grades, then maybe volunteering, so maybe they love animals, they want to volunteer at a local farm. And then when they're in the later grades, the upper grades, especially towards nearing graduation, that's where you look at mentoring and apprenticeships. So for me, it was just finding the specific area of interest and saying, okay, I'm going to reach out to them and be honest about the needs of your child or your teen. I have found, and I know other parents who have said, well, I don't want to disclose their disability because I want to give them the best opportunity. I have to tell you personally that the couple of times I did not disclose our son's needs, it was a disaster. When I shared, so his current job, he works at a small, very small independent hardware store part-time, in addition to the other things. And he was just very clear and said, I have an FASD. And this is, we use And this is a great resource. It's called The 8 Magic Keys of FASD. It's a wonderful document. And he brought it with him, and he's like, this is, he shared, I'm not very good with money, but I can measure like to, a 16th or whatever the measurement of an inch, So I taught him to be his own advocate. But in those times that your child may not be able to do that, you have to be their advocate too, in helping to find that. And again, make sure this person is safe. I would, just make sure they're trusted, because we also know that our children can be, susceptible, to situations. So use your judgment as a parent, as their care. But also start with people and people who you trust with your child. Because, for example, for us, with our daughter and her art, we knew the art center. We had friends who went there, and then it just grew from there. So, if you're starting with people that have, that genuine interest in your child, and who are willing to make accommodations, but say, yes, I would love to have your son or daughter help or volunteer or even apprentice. You're going to have to step out of your shell, but I can tell you it's worth it, because the 2 teachers that we found for our son, they're still involved in our lives. They're wonderful. We love them, and our son wouldn't be where he is today without them.
That's lovely to hear. And I just want to say thank you very much for spending time with us. Well, I want to say this evening, it's the middle of the afternoon for you. And I'm sure that everybody has really benefited and enjoyed listening to you this evening. And so just a word to the attendees tonight, you will receive an email from us, and it will contain a feedback SurveyMonkey link, and it will contain all the links to Natalie's book, which is readily available on Amazon, and links to Natalie's podcast as well. If you submitted a question either tonight or prior to tonight, and you have attended, then you're in with the possibility of winning a copy of Natalie's book. And if you are one of the lucky winners, then we'll be in touch within the next day or two via email, asking you for your address so we can post that on to you. So just like to say again, thank you very much, Natalie, and thank you everybody for attending. The recording of tonight's event will be on the FASD Hub YouTube channel within the next few days. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar, which is on the 7th of September. We will be hosting Jan and Rossi, who are a birth mother and son, who are coming to talk about their experiences of FASD, and more details of that on our social media or on our Eventbrite page. So again, thank you very much, everybody, and we hope that you have a nice evening. Good evening.